Today's daf we're going to be learning is Makot Daf Yud Zayin. We're going to get started from the topic that we finished with in the previous class, which was Tevel and Maaser Rishon. So we have this case of someone who eats Tevel gets lashes. And then came Rav and clarified and said, just so you understand, even Tevel of Maaser Ani, which is in the third and the sixth year, you separate a part you give to a poor person. Rashi points out what's the unique? Why is he specifying? Why would you think this would be any different? Because Maaser Ani doesn't really have sanctity to it because it can be eaten by anybody, and therefore it's just in a different place. It can be eaten anywhere. It can be eaten by anybody, and therefore it's much less severe than the truma, of course, which can only be eaten by kohanim. Even the Maaser Rishon that goes to the Levi, even though theoretically other people could eat it, you don't have to be a Levite to eat it, but you have to take truma from it. So that already again means part of it is forbidden to, part of it has truma needs to be taken, which again, once you get to truma, you get the death. I mean, you actually get death by the hands of God if you eat truma and you're not a Kohen. So that's all very severe. But even Maaser Ani, he says, to which the Gemara had said, by the way, this is like a Tannaitic opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Now comes Rav Yosef at the end of our daf and says at the end of yesterday's daf, Tatzayin Amubet, Amar Rav Yosef Kitanai. This issue that he says is a machloket tanaim, which basically we're going to say the debate is what he says is a Tannaitic debate whether or not it's called tevel if you haven't taken the poor person's tithe. So here goes. Here's the Braita, and we're going to see, is this really the issue? Right now, Rav Yosef says it is. Abai is going to come and say, that's not the debate between these two Tanaim. It has to do with something else. So, or perhaps it has to do with something else. No one really knows what the debate is about. Everyone can explain the debate, but the question is what it's based on. So the case they're describing is what we call demai. Demai is when you get produce from an Amma Aretz. Now, Amma Aretz in general, we suspect that they didn't necessarily take all of their tithes. We assume they take truma because that's very severe, but we don't assume that they take maaser. Okay, and therefore, if you get produce from an Amma Aretz, whether you buy or whether you get a gift, you have to be concerned that maybe the maaser weren't taken. In general, we're concerned that, on the one hand, they take prohibitions somewhat seriously. On the other hand, they don't like to, taking tithes of all your produce means you lose out on money, and they don't like to lose money. So they kind of play this game where, sometimes they'll do things, but other things they won't do because it's not worth it to them, right? When it's truma, it's high level. So, okay, they'll be careful, but maaser, not as much. So if you have demai, and then you separated the Maaser Rishon already, and then you have to separate the Truma from there. That you have to deal with because if the whole question is we don't know for sure if they did or not. So you do it out of a doubt because otherwise you're going to be eating stuff that should be Truma. Because once you take the Maaser for the Levi, as I said, theoretically you can eat yourself. And when it's a doubtful case, you actually can eat it because which we learned many, many times, which means the burden of proof is on the person who wants to get it from you. So unless a Levite can come and say, I know that's not yours, they don't know because no one knows whether maybe the Maaser was taken already and maybe the Levi got Maaser from here. So the Levi can't prove it, therefore you can keep it, but you do have to take a tenth of it and give to the Kohen because the Levi would have had to do that, so you have to do that as well. So that for sure you have to do because there's Truma in there. But Maaser Ani, which basically what's going to be? I'll separate this out of a doubt. But because it's a doubt, no poor person will come claim it and I won't have to give it to anybody. So I'll eat myself. So what's the point of separating it? So the point of separating it would be simply a halachic act of permitting the tevel. Follow? So if I have to call it maaser ani and designate this, right? I don't know if you've ever taken Truma and Maaser, but when you do that, you say this part of it is going to be right. The part in the northern is going to be this, and the part in this is going to be that. So do you have to say that, even though theoretically, right, a minute later you can eat it? So now we're going to see that Rabbi Eliezer says, "Ain't sarich likrota tashem maaser ani shel demai." You don't even have to call it anything because in the end, right? What would you say? It's not called tevel for maaser ani if it wasn't taken. Because Maaser Ani is not that significant, and in any case, right, since this is all a case of a doubt, so there's no point to separate it out. He says you have to call it by name. You have to say the northern part of this pile of produce will be Maaser Ani, but then you can eat it a minute later. Now, why does he require you to do that? It's like I said, it's just sort of a halachic act, there's no significance to it because you're going to eat it yourself. Well, my la bahakami palge, is this not the root of the machloket? Demar savar vadai tovlo, umar savar vadai no tovlo. Well, here we're talking about a case of doubt, but it's all based on what if it was definite that you hadn't taken it? Would this be called tevel? Would you get lashes for eating it? So if it's not called tevel, if you haven't, right, you haven't separated maaser ani because it's not as significant, it doesn't have sanctity to it in any way. So if you don't do it, it's actually not called tevel. Well, then you don't even have to call it a name in this case, where really there's no ramifications at all. But if you say that vadai tovlo, that if you know for sure that maaser ani wasn't taken, then this pile is called tevel, and that's what Rav said. You're going to get lashes for eating that. Then you have to designate it. But again, you don't have to separate it out because you can eat it yourself because in the end, there's no one to collect it. And again, it doesn't have sanctity to it. So that seems to be the root of the machloket. That's what Rav Yosef says. And here you see that's the exact debate that they were having is what Rav said. It's one side of the debate, right? Rav, it's like the rabbis that, right? Sorry. Rav said, right. Rav is like the rabbis because you have to call it by name because otherwise it'll be called teva. But Amarle Abaye says it doesn't make any sense to say that the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis is this issue of if, right, do you have to separate the maaser ani to, right, to prevent this from being tevel, untithed produce? Because not because it doesn't sound like that's what they're arguing about, but because of a simple reason. If so, why would they be debating if that's their issue? Is it tevel if you haven't separated the maaser ani or not? That's a much more central issue than a case of if you're in doubt, this is what you do, right? That's more a ramification of a bigger machloket. So if they're having that machloket, it makes sense that they'd have debated that exact issue and not some side ramification of that issue. And therefore, Abaye says, I don't think that's the machloket, and he suggests a different possibility. Ela de kule alma vadai tovlo. Everybody thinks like Rav, that if you don't take maaser ani, it's tevel. You have to take all of the tithes in order to say this is now permitted to eat. Okay, the rest of the pile. Of course, you have to separate it out. But what's the question? Well, remember what demai is. It's produce I got from an Ama Aretz. Now, the whole question is, what do we suspect Ama Aretz do or don't do? So here's the machloket. Hacha b'hakami palge. Mar savar lo nichshedu Ama Aretz ha'maaser ani shel demai. Why does Rabbi Eliezer think you don't have to separate it at all? You don't have to call it by name. Because he says, I mean, Aretz, of course you're going to separate Maaser ani. Why? Because what's always the issue? That the money is what's bothering them. Well, kevan de mamonahu afrushe mafrish. Their Amei Aretz are clearly going to separate Maaser ani because, put in a phrase, right, an expression, it's no skin off their back. Why? Because they'll separate it to avoid the isur. If vadai tavlo, right, they care about isurim, they don't want to do something wrong, so they'll separate it out. But they don't want to spend the money, so what will they do? They'll just keep it for themselves. In other words, they care about not eating tevel produce. That's serious, but they'll just say, "Oh, but I'll just keep it and eat it, and I won't bother giving it to poor people." But at least they've dealt with the tevel issue, right? Obviously, it's wrong to do that; it doesn't belong to them. But at least they'll say, "Well, I'll do that. I don't care about so much." So therefore, we assume they actually. So if I get produce from them, I can assume they separated out maaser ani. The fact that they didn't give it to a poor person, that's not my problem at all. But Rabbanan say, Kevan de tricha le milta lo mafrish. It's not just about the money. They don't like to bother, like the laziness approach or the attitude. It's a headache to separate everything out and call it by name. So that they don't like, if it's not so significant, so they just won't do it. Okay, and that's the debate between them. Whether what is, and this is interesting in terms of if you think about it, right? What motivates people not to do things? Is it laziness or is it financial? Right? They're both those factors. And the question is, right, what would we say here? Kama yochal min hatevel. Now we go back to the Mishnah. In fact, I'm going to read this back in the Mishnah because we learned the Mishnah a few days ago, and you might not remember. So if you go back to the first Mishnah in the chapter, Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, it says, there's this debate between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Kama yochal min hatevel v'yehei chayav. How much do you eat from the tevel to be liable? Okay, when you get lashes, is there a minimum requisite amount, right? We usually have a minimum requisite amount. For food, it's usually kizayit. But Rabbi Shimon says kol shehu. He says you eat a little bit of tevel, and presumably he's talking about all halachic issues that you're going to get lashes for eating. You're going to get it for eating any amount. And the rabbis say, what are you talking about? You need a requisite amount of a kazayit to be liable for lashes. I'm just going to finish the Mishnah. We'll go back, and then we'll go back to our Gemara. And in fact, we're going to quote this whole line in our Gemara. Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, how could you say kol shu you're not chayav? Don't you agree with eating a whole ant? And we talked about this yesterday. You eat a complete ant. Of course you're liable. Don't you agree with me? Amrulo, they said to him, that's because it's a complete creature. To which they, Amar lahen, he says to them, even one chita is like a briata. So 1 grain of wheat should also be you should be liable for eating, right? A grain of wheat that wasn't tithed. Amrulo, no, period. Okay? They say even a grain of wheat. And that's where the discussion ends, and you don't see what the rabbis respond. Okay? Today in the Gemara, we're going to see what the rabbis respond. And there's a good shir on Gefet on this, which only went up in Hebrew so far. Hopefully by Sunday we'll get the English, and the English will go up. And if in the Hebrew also, Dr. Merav Tubakana gave a whole shir on bugs and checking food and all that, like more of a halachic shir if you're interested in Hebrew. But Gefet is really on the content here, and there's some interesting things that are going to come up. And this machloket between a bria being a creature or even just a grain of wheat. Okay? And a more in-depth, like Tosfot asked a big question. Anyway, we're going to learn the sugya, and then you can learn Gefet, which goes much more in depth into these issues. So, Kama Yochanan Tevel. Amar Rabibi, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. I'm now back in the Gemara. Machloket bechita, aval bekemach divrei hakol kizayit. Rish Lakish says, the debate between them in the end, now I want to be very clear here. In the beginning, Rabbi Shimon says any amount. He doesn't say it has to be a grain, right? He just said any amount. When he starts arguing with the rabbis, they start arguing. He says an ant, and then he says a wheat, right? And then he seems to be talking about a complete grain. So the question is, when he says kolshu, does it have to be a complete something? Or can it be crushed up? Like we talked about crushed up ants, right? Now we're talking about crushed up grains of wheat, which would be flour, ground up. I wouldn't call it crushed, but ground. So he says the following. The machloket between them is only in a grain. But when it comes to flour, everyone agrees that you need a kazayit of flour to be liable. Rabbi Yirmiyah, I want you to remember, think about how radical Rabbi Shimon is, because the rabbis are saying what we always know, which is kazayit. Rabbi Shimon, right? Kazayit for everything. We always need a kazayit. Okay, whether it's for bracha, whether it's for isurim, it's always kazayit. Rabbi Shimon, who's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, has this unique approach, and it actually fits with who he is. Because any amount of anything is really a rebellion against God. What's the difference whether you ate a kazayit or you ate a little bit, right? You rebelled against God by doing something that's forbidden. So if you take that approach, it doesn't have anything to do with a bria, right? It really has to do with anything. But in any case, Rish Lakish thinks, based on the whole line of arguing that they had in the Mishnah, that it's all a grain. But if it's flour ground up, it wouldn't be. You would need a kazayit. But Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, by the way, this is a machloga between, sorry, I got confused. It's not a machloga between Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yirmiyah. It's between Rabbi Bibi in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yirmiyah in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, k'machloket bezo kach machloket bezo. The machloket is the same in both cases, okay? In other words, they have a machloket about the grains of wheat, and they have a machloket also about the flour. So now we're going to have a question. It's not. It says in the Mishnah, Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so now the Mishnah is going to come and question Rabbi Yirmiyah's approach, because the Mishnah says, Achal nemalach kol shehu. Okay, so now he says, don't you agree? Achal nemalach kol shehu shu chayav? And amru lo mipnei shehu kibriata. And they said, no, that's because it's kibriata, because that's the way it was created, right? It's a creature. Amar lahen, af chita achad kibriata. And then he says, what do you mean? Also, chita is kibriata. Chita in kemach lo. Now here comes the drasha. They said, what do you see from here? A grain of wheat, yes, but not flour, because specifically what he talked about was a grain of wheat. Okay, that's their argument. So now we say, so how do we answer this question according to Rabbi Yirmiyah? This seems to go directly against Rabbi Yirmiyah because Rabbi Yirmiyah said it's only, right? Rabbi Yirmiyah said it's even for flour. And that's certainly not what it seems in their line of arguing. To which we say, and this is a classic answer when we have this, we say, Lidivrehem ka'amar lehu. He was really talking according to their opinion. Okay, and what he was saying to them is the following. Lididi afilu kemach. According to me, even flour. But, so I think it's across the board, and that's how Rabbi Yirmiyah explains himself. Ela lididchu, but according to you, at least agree with me that even a grain, okay, so I know you're not going to agree with me about flour, but if you're going to say a nimala is a bria, then you should agree also about a grain of wheat. To which, right, so then they say, Birabanan, what are, now here we get, and Yael Shimoni says this nice in her shir. She says, notice that we never got the rabbi's response. When he said, Chita chad kebriata, we never heard what the response was to that. So they say, Rabbanan, you hear the Gemara adds, what would the rabbi's approach be? Rabbanan, briat neshama chashuva. Chita lo chashuva. First of all, this adds the issue of chashivut. What is it? What makes it like? Why is it that it's not that you're going to be liable for one ant? You're going to be liable for one ant because it has significance. And what gives it significance? The fact that it has a neshama, it has a soul, right? Okay, I don't know if ants have souls, but it was a living thing. This is the difference between things that are living and things that are growing, right? So plants and all that. So when it comes to the grains, that's not significant because it doesn't have a neshama in it. It doesn't have life in it. Okay, it's not alive in the sense that a living creature is alive. It is, it has a plant life to it. So that's the distinction that the rabbis will make. Okay, and but the whole thing here, besides that we got this added additional thing about because it's a neshama, and that's the rabbi's response, we also could now prove that this was a way of reading Rabbi Shimon. He was only talking l'shitat chachamim, but not according to his own approach. And Tanya kavatei Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now we're going to bring a proof for Rabbi Yirmiyah's reading. Rabbi Shimon omer koshu lamakot la'amru kezayit ela linyan korban. And here we also get something new from this Braita, even though the Braita is really just coming to prove Rabbi Yirmiyah's position, which is koshu lamakot. Okay, meaning always. It doesn't say bria here. It doesn't say whole, complete, anything like that. Anytime you get lashes, and this is again a very unique shita, but it makes a lot of sense, right? Rabbi Yirmiyah's works, right? The first approach, Rabbi works well with the wording of the Mishnah because he was arguing chita versus, right, the chita versus the ant, but it's talking about a whole grain. But Rabbi Yirmiyah's works better because what's he really saying? It's not just about importance. It's about anything you do that goes against God is you transgress and you should get lashes for it. Now, what's the issue of a kazayit? He can't ignore the fact that we always talk about a kazayit. Kazayit, that's only le'inyan korban. That's if you did it bishkaga. Unwittingly, when do you have to bring a korban? Let's say it's a karet, if you did it b'mezid, b'shogeg, you'd have to bring a korban. That's when you need a kazayit. And if you talk about this whole idea of rebelling against God, makes sense. When you're rebelling against God, you're doing something intentional. We're going to make you liable, the lashes, right away, any amount. But if it's unwitting, so it's more of a, did you actually do something of significance? It needs a certain amount rather than just a little bit. Okay, so that's another, which is interesting. We're getting back to the whole unwitting topic, which was all the topic of the previous chapter. So that was our little machloket here about how we view this machloket between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. And from this, this is going to take us through tomorrow's daf. Ha'ochel bikurim ad shelo kara alehem. Okay, even this first line is really the whole impetus for this whole sugya that's going to go through tomorrow, which is if you eat bikurim. Now, let's just talk about bikurim. Bikurim, you bring your first fruits to the temple. You have to say mikra bikurim. That's Arami Oved Avi that we read at Leila Seder. It's in Devarim chapter 26, with a little bit more than what you it then says, and I brought this to the temple, blah, 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 right? And God brought us to the land, and I brought it to the temple. That part we don't say in the Seder. So you eat bikurim. Now, then you put it down in front of the altar, and then you give it to the Kohen. And the Kohen, or the Kohen puts it in front of the altar. The Kohen then eats it. Okay? He's allowed to eat it. So now, what if he ate bikurim? Now, this is a little tricky because who does the mikra bikurim? The person who brings them. Who eats it? The Kohen. The Kohen can get lashes if the person who brought the bikurim didn't read the mikra bikurim. If the bikurim were brought without the mikra bikurim, and the Kohen then eats those bikurim, the Kohen is liable to get lashes. That's this first halacha. And we're going to see very soon there's a machloket about is it the not reading the bikurim that causes you to get lashes, or is that not so significant? If you didn't do that, it's okay. It's the not putting it in front of the altar that's critical. Okay, so there's a machloket. Which one is the critical element? Which one has to happen? And if it doesn't happen and the Kohen ate the bikurim, the Kohen would get lashes. Kodshe kodshim chutz l'klaim. This is also meat, sacrificial meat, or other sanctified items that are kodshe kodshim, the high level sanctity, which the Kohen gets to eat, but only in the azara area. He can't eat them outside. So if he ate them outside, he gets lashes. Kodshim kalim u'maser sheni chutz l'choma. This is for anyone to eat. Okay, so kodshim kalim, which is the lower level, like toda, shlamim, all those, the owner gets to eat the meat, the one who brought the korban. Maser sheni is what we bring, the produce we bring to Jerusalem. Both those things have to be eaten in the walls of Jerusalem. So if you eat them outside the walls of Jerusalem, you will get lashes. Hashover te'etzem bepesach hatahor. If you have a korban pesach that's tahor, meaning it's a good korban pesach, it's valid, you're not allowed to break the bones. It says that very clearly in the Torah. Etzem lo tishberu bo. So you can't use like a big cleaver to cut the meat because you'll break the bones. Hareza lo karaba'im. You get lashes for that. Aval hamutir b'tahor. But we're going to have two cases where you don't get lashes. If you leave over the meat of a korban pesach and you don't eat it by the next morning, you don't get lashes. We know because that's a lavanita klase. And a shover batame. If you break a bone in a disqualified korban pesach, that's fine. You don't get lashes. A no lo karaba'im. Now we have a quote. We have the Mishnah that was quoted yesterday. Hanotel ema labanim. We talked about this because is it lavanita klase or not? If you take the mother bird with the chicks, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lokeh ve'eno mishalech. Chachamim omrim mishalech ve'eno lokeh. So we have this machloket. Are you supposed to send away the mother bird, and then you can take the chicks? Are you allowed to do that? Right? Is the whole idea that's first send her away, then you can take them. But right, what happens if you took them all, her and her young, and then are you allowed, can you fix it by sending it away, or is sending away only the early stage? So Rabbi Yehuda says it's only the early stage, and therefore you're going to basically get lashes for what you did. There is no lavanita klase here. It's not that shalach to shalach is a fixing of it. You've already done this, the transgression. Chachamim say mishalech ve'eno lokeh. No, you send it after, and then you won't get lashes because that's a way to fix it, rectify the problem. And the Chachamim continue, and others quoted all this yesterday. Zaklal, this is the rule. If you have a negative commandment that has a positive way to fulfill it after and fix it, you don't get lashes for that. So now we're going to deal with the first three things. The bikurim, we're really going to start with that, but from there we're going to also get into eating kodesh kodeshim outside the walls outside the Azara, and eating kodesh kalim maser sheni outside the walls of Jerusalem. But like I said, right now we're just focusing on bikurim, and you have to read the mikra bikurim. If you didn't read the mikra bikurim, then it's as if you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. And if the Kohen eats the bikurim, he's liable. Okay, I saw, Terry, you asked, like, how's the Kohen supposed to know? So that's, I guess, the Kohen's issue. The Kohen has to be responsible to figure out, right? I was thinking it's like an occupational hazard, right? It's kind of one of the things, if you're a Kohen, you got to be careful because there's things you can eat that will basically get you lashes. So I guess the Kohen's responsible to check. Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Zo divrei Rabbi Akiva stimta. Aval, okay, this is our Mishnah goes like Rabbi Akiva. Aval chachamim omrim, but the rabbis say bikurim hanacham akeva b'hem kriya ema akeva b'hem. I told you there's a machlok, and this is what we see right now. The rabbis disagree with Rabbi Akiva on this, and they say it's putting it near the altar that is the obligation that makes it critical. It's not bikurim unless you do that. It's not the mikra bikurim. It's not the reading. So now the Gemara says, okay, we're going to leave Chachamim aside. We're going to get back to them tomorrow in this machloka between them. But Chachamim omrim, I'm sorry, Vilema, zo divrei Rabbi Shimon stimta. Why don't we say this is the words of Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Akiva? Now, Rabbi Shimon was a student of Rabbi Akiva, so why are they asking this? Well, they're asking it because we're going to see. There's a famous Mishnah, it must have been famous, otherwise it's unclear why they're asking this. Famous Mishnah where Rabbi Shimon darshans this. So why would you say Rabbi Akiva when it's Rabbi Shimon's Shita? That's the known approach. Rabbi Shimon, again, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's one of the prized students of Rabbi Akiva. Why don't you say it's Rabbi Shimon? Because we know Rabbi Shimon says this, and everyone knows that. So Hachamash Malan Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Shimon Sfirale. It's a little bit of a weird statement because it says it's to tell you that Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Shimon. That's weird. Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold like Rabbi Shimon. He was his teacher. But what it means is that Rabbi Akiva also held by that Shita, meaning Rabbi Shimon took his rabbi's approach and kind of made it famous or well known to people in this. He darshaned it all from the psukim, but it's really his teachers, and as they wanted you to know, Rabbi Akiva also holds that way, because obviously you know Rabbi Shimon holds that way. He wants you to know that Rabbi Akiva holds that way as well. Okay, but now we're going to get into Rabbi Shimon, and we're going to, from now till the end of today's daf and into tomorrow's daf, is dealing with this braita of Rabbi Shimon. It's a long braita. It's not so complicated. It sounds a little complicated at first, but when you go over it again, it's actually not super complicated, just a little long-winded. And what we're going to do today is we're going to bring the braita. We're going to explain all the different parts of the braita. Then we're going to bring up some questions on the braita. And then we're going to say we have a problem now because something in this braita really doesn't work. We're going to kind of raise a few questions until we get to a question where we really can't answer it anymore. And then they're going to have to reread something in the braita, and that's going to be tomorrow. So, my Rabbi Shimon, luckily it's Friday, the daf is going to go up soon, so you can listen after if you're really curious. Titania. Okay, we're going to darshan this pasuk. Here's the pasuk. It's Dvarim, chapter 12, verse 17. Lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha. You can't eat in your gates, which basically means you have to go to Jerusalem to eat all of these things. Okay, all these things can't be eaten wherever you're living. You have to go to Jerusalem. What are they? Ma'aser degan chavatu b'shchavi yitzarecha. Okay, tithes, which is the second tithes, because not all the other ones need to be eaten in Jerusalem. Bechorot bekarcha b'tzoncha. The bechor, the firstborn you give to the Kohen, and the Kohen has to sacrifice it and eat it in Jerusalem because it's kodshim kalim, which are eaten in Jerusalem. Kol nidarecha asher tidor v'nidvotecha. Any voluntary offerings that you bring. And Trumat Yadecha. Now, Trumat Yadecha sounds like Truma, but Truma doesn't need to be eaten in Jerusalem. You could eat Truma anywhere. So immediately, the first drasha on the braita is going to be on the last word. I want you to notice that the order of what Rabbi Shimon's going to darshan is all of these words, okay? Trumat Yadecha, Nidvotecha, Bechor, okay, we'll see, all the words he darshans, and not in the order they appear in the pasuk. We'll get to that later. Titania. Utrumat Yadecha, El Bikurim. Because bikurim are similar to truma because there's something that you give to the Kohen, and only the Kohen can eat them. Amar Rabbi Shimon, mazabala lamdenu. So now comes Rabbi Shimon, and he's going to say this for each and every word in this pasuk. What is this coming to teach us? Im lo'achlan chutz l'choma. If you're going to say this teaches us the pshat that you can't eat it outside the walls of Jerusalem. Kavachomer mimaser hakal. Maser sheni is the least stringent of all these things, okay? Because it doesn't really have sanctity to it. We're going to go through, okay? But it's the least stringent of all these things. And if Maaser, which is the first thing in the pasuk, has to be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem, it's a kavachomer that obviously all these things have to be eaten in the walls of Jerusalem. And therefore, it can't be, okay, so ma maaser hakalo, chutz l'chomal, okay, if you're going to get lashes for eating maaser outside the walls of Jerusalem, bikurim lo koshakein, of course you're going to get malko for eating bikurim outside the walls of Jerusalem. So, therefore, it can't be coming to teach you that. So we have a lotase associated with bikurim, but it's not the obvious one because that can be learned by kavachomer. So halo ba katuv ela. So the pasuk must be teaching you something new, and that's what he's going to do with every word in this pasuk. He's going to say, "Oh, I can't be teaching you outside the walls because it's obvious. You could learn it from Maaser Sheni." So what must it be teaching you? It must be teaching you if you eat bikurim and you didn't. The person who gave them to you didn't say mikra bikurim, you get lashes. Okay, that's the chiddush. Nidvotecha, voluntary offerings. Zo toda u'shlamim. This is a toda and shlamim. Okay, these are the Thanksgiving offerings. These are the offerings that people eat themselves. Okay, you're going to see that he goes kind of from less stringent to more stringent. That's the order of his pasuk. Amar Rabbi Shimon, what does this come to teach us? The simple reading, don't eat this in your gates, meaning outside Jerusalem, kal v'chomer mimaser. Obviously, a korban is more severe and stringent than the maser. So it can't be. It's coming to teach you that. Halo bakatuv ela lochel b'todah u'shlamim lifnei zrika shulokeh. If I bring a Thanksgiving offering or a korban shlamim, a peace offering, I eat the meat. But when do I eat the meat? Only after the blood was sprinkled on the altar. If I eat it before the blood was sprinkled on the altar, I get lashes. And that's what this is coming to teach you from the word midvotecha. Because generally shlamim and toda offerings are voluntary. Ubechorot. Okay, that's easy. Izah bechor. That's obviously coming to teach you bechor. Again, we're ready for this. Amar b'shimon, mazbala lamdenu. Now here, we're going to start doing something else, in addition to what we've been doing until now. Each time we said it can't be teaching you chutz choma because we learned that from Maser. So we're going to do that as well. But now, as opposed to the Bikurim one, which stands alone, each other one is going to build on the previous. So whatever is true for Toda and Shlamim is also going to be true for Bechor. So right now we learn one thing from Toda and Shlamim. Now we're going to learn 2 from the next and 3 from the next and 4 for the next. Okay, we're going to go like that through each one because each one is more severe than the next. So we're going to be able to learn all the previous Isurim as well. So you're going to get lashes for multiple things for each one. So let's see inside. So im lifnei zrika, if we want to say before you sprinkle the blood on the sacrifice, the Kohen can't eat it, kavachomer b'toda and shlamim. Well, Bechor is more stringent because it's only eaten by the Kohen. Also, it's sanctified already from birth. So it's obviously more severe than Toda and Shlamim. So halo ba'katuv ela le'ochel min ha'bechor afilu la'achar zrika shulokeh. So basically what we're going to have is, number 1, you're going to get lashes for eating it outside the walls of Jerusalem. Number 2, you're going to get lashes if you ate it before zrika, before they sprinkled the blood. The Kohen eats it. 3, if it's after the blood is sprinkled and the Kohen's allowed to eat it, but let's say a non-Kohen eats it. That must be the Chiddush of Bechor. Okay, that's why Bechor is mentioned. If a non-Kohen eats it after the blood is sprinkled, once it's permitted to the Kohen, but not permitted to a non-Kohen, well, you're going to get lashes, right? That non-Kohen who eats it. Now we go up a level again. Sin offerings and guilt offerings. I'm a Rabbi Shimon, right? And this is you learn, even though it's Bechorot, B'karcha v'tzoncha, they say extra words here. We'll say it's coming for Chatan and Asham. What's it coming to teach us? So now we're going to go through all the previous, except for, again, Mikra Bikurim is separate because nothing else has some sort of text you say with it. Okay, outside the walls of Jerusalem, we already got that from Matzah. Before you sprinkle the blood, Kavachomer from Toda and Shlamim, right? If Lachar Zrika for a non-Kohen, Kavachomer mi Bechor. You can learn it from a Kavachomer from Bechor. Halo ba'katuv ela lochel chatap asham afilu lachar zrika chutz liklaim shulokeh. The chatap yasham have to be eaten in the walls of Jerusalem, the walls of the Azarah. If you take it outside the Azarah, you got lashes. That's actually the halacha in our Mishnah, right? The first one was the halacha in our Mishnah. The first halacha ochel bikurim ad shelo kara. Now we get to koche koshim chutz liklaim, right? And the next one is koshim kalu maser shein chutz l'choma, which we learned also. Okay, so all these halachot are in here, plus there's some more. Nidarecha zo ola. Now we're at the last one, the ola. What's the ola? Completely burnt. That's the most severe of all of them because all of it goes to God. None of it gets eaten. Amar Rabbi Shimon. So now we're going to go through. Mazabal lamdenu. Now we go through all of them. It's good review. If it's lochlan chutz l'choma to eat outside the walls of Jerusalem, kal v'chomer from Maser. Obviously, if Maser can't be eaten, this one. If it's before you sprinkle the blood, you eat it. Well, of course, you're going to get lashes for that. Kavachomer from Toda and Shlamim. If it's after the blood was sprinkled, kavachomer mi Bechor. Even Bechor, right? And if a non-Kohen eats it, it's going to be, right, from Bechor. If you ate it outside the Azara, kavachomer from Chatat and Asham. If on Chatat and Asham, you took it outside the walls and you ate it. Of course, the Ola, if you took it outside the walls of the Azara and ate it. Halo ba'katuv. So what's it coming for? Turning out Amabet. Well, the ola can't be eaten at all. So even if you eat it, right, all the times when generally things can be eaten after zrika and inside the walls of the azara, but that doesn't help you because the ola can't be eaten at all. So you're going to get lashes for that. Okay, so that's how that's this whole long drasha that Rabbi Shimon does. Now we're going to see Rava's reaction to this drasha. And again, we brought this all just to say The Mishnah that talks about Bikurim, if you didn't do Mikra Bikurim and you eat it, that's only Rabbi Shimon because the rabbis disagree about that point. They think it's Hanacha and not Kriya. Okay, that's Ma'akev, that makes it necessary. That I said we're going to get into that whole machloka tomorrow, but for this we brought this whole on Braita. I'm a Rava. Rava has an interesting reaction. He says, Dialida ime Rabbi Shimon teled. Anyone who's going to give birth to a baby should give birth to a baby. Any mother should give birth to a child like Rabbi Shimon. Wow, he's amazing. Okay, like his reaction to this drasha is, wow, what a brilliant drasha. V'ilo, okay, this is a little bit strange, lo teled. If you're not going to give birth to a child like Rabbi Shimon, well, better off not having the child. Okay, which is a little extreme, and the commentaries all say, what are you talking about? And they all try to answer it. I like to answer these by saying, it's just an extreme way of saying, I think Rabbi Shimon's amazing. Okay, he doesn't really mean that literally don't bother having children. Obviously, he doesn't mean that. And remember, Rabbi Shimon was in a category of his own. There was nobody in the world who was like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So that's also, I saw you asking before, the Stam Rabbi Shimon and the Gemara is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, just so you should know. Okay? There are other Rabbi Shimons, but usually they come with a name. Okay, they don't come with Stam Rabbi Shimon, like we had Rabbi Shimon Bar Yehuda or something like that. The usual Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But here comes Rava. Okay, Rava didn't finish talking. Even though, okay, I think this drush is brilliant, even though I could totally knock it down. And right now, he's going to undo the whole premise of everything in this Braita. Okay, everything in this Braita was built on the premise of this one's more severe than this, and this is more, right? This one's more stringent than this is more stringent than this. He's going to flip everyone on its tail. My chumra de bikurim mimaser. Why do you say bikurim is more severe than maser? He's going to go in order. Sheken asurim lazarim, right? Because bikurim can't be eaten by a non-kohen. Adraba, maser chamor, sheken asur laonein. But maser has a unique stringency that nothing else has, which is you can't eat it if you're an onein. Okay, now some of them maybe you can't, but there it's clearly asur because it says you're supposed to say this vidoy masrod. It's another text that you're supposed to say. You say it like once every 7 years. Or no, twice in a 7-year cycle. I got rid of all the maaser from my house, and you say this whole text, I treated all the maaser properly, I did all I was supposed to, and you say v'lo achalti ba'oni mimenu. I didn't eat it when I was in onein, which is that time in between when someone dies, a relative dies, and you haven't done the burial yet. Umay chomer de todo shlamim mimaser. Now, why was it obvious to Rabbi Shimon that Toda is more severe, Toda and shlamim from maser? Shekain tuni matan damim, because you have to put blood on the altar. Imurim l'gabeim zbeach, you put the imurim on. In other words, obviously a sacrifice is more strict than the maser, sheni, that you just eat in Jerusalem. But adraba, maser chamor, you could say maser has astringency about it. Shekain tunim kesef tzura. It has a unique halacha that appears by nothing else. That when you redeem it onto a coin, it has to be a coin with a tzura. What do you say? Like an engraving it. Can't just be a flat coin. Umay, right? What we call an asimon, which is not right. So yeah, minted is a good word. Thank you. Umay chumra de bechor mitodo shlamim. What's the chumra of a bechor, of a firstborn, from a toda and a shlamim? Why did you think it was obvious it was a chumrah? Sheken kedusha tomi rechem, because a bechor is an animal that from the moment it was born, it was already sanctified. It's a firstborn. Whereas a toda and shlamim, you took some random animal and gave it sanctity. But adraba, todo shlamim chamurim sheken tunim smicha unisachim utnuvat chasev shok. Toda and shlamim have all sorts of unique halachot with them. You have to do smicha on the animal, which you don't have to do with the bechor. You have to add nisachim, like the wine libations, and you have to do the tnuva chazav shok. You do the waving of the chest and the thigh. Okay, so that also has unique stringencies. Now, as soon as you can find some unique stringency, you could say it's not necessarily that you can learn one from the other. You can see, he keeps going. He has every single stage. What's the chumrah of chatat and asham from bechor? Shekain koshe kodshim, right? They're higher level sanctity. That seems pretty clear, right? And bechor is a lower level sanctity, meaning it could be eaten in Jerusalem and not just within the walls of the Azara, but the chatat and asham have to be in the walls of the Azara, besides some other things. Adraba, bechor chamor, shekain kedushat tomerechem. Again, you have the issue of the bechor being more severe, right? Besides, it was more severe from Toda and Shlamim because it was sanctified from the Rechem. Also, it's more severe than the Chatat Yasham, right? Whatever animal you designated, there were animals that were designated that weren't anything before. I might have accidentally said Chatat Yasham before. I meant Toda and Shlamim. But either which way, it's more severe than both of these things because of that, right? So before we used it as, that's why you thought it was more severe than the other. Anyway, here we're using it in the other direction. Umay chomer de ola michata. Why is an ola more severe than a chatat? Va'asham, right? That's obvious. Shekin kalil, right? The ola is the highest level because the entire thing gets burned. Adrabah, you could say the reverse. Chata va'asham chamir shekem chapre. They atone for sins. The ola doesn't atone for any sins, so maybe that's why. So all these have chumras, and in fact, now he says this crazy one. Kulu chamirimi ola. Everything is more severe than ola, which is crazy to say, but de'ipahu shtei achilot. Because all of these have two achilot, and this is only one. What does it mean, two achilot? The ola is burnt completely on the altar. That means it's burnt in one way only. Now, burnt, achila, means burnt or consumed. All the other sacrifices, not the maaser, but all the other sacrifices get burned. Some parts get burned on the altar, and some parts get eaten by the owner or by the Kohen. So that means two achilot. There's the human consumption of it and the altar consumption of it. And that makes it unique in a severe kind of way, even though it's kind of funny, it doesn't really sound right because getting burned completely to God should obviously be more severe. But again, what he's saying is there's some element of chumrah in the others as well, because there's two achilot and not one. Okay, so now we have to go back and say, well, Elamai Yalidi Ime Rabbi Shimon. Why did he say Rabbi Shimon is so brilliant and you should have children like Rabbi Shimon if he just knocked out his entire, right, the whole basis of his drasha? To which the Gemara answers, because even though he disagrees with him, he says the way Rabbi Shimon does it, though, the way he holds, he said it's brilliant the way he chopped up that pasuk, rearranged the order, and came. Right, it's really a beautiful drasha because what he's able to do is right. He starts with Bechor, which kind of stands on its own, even though that was the last thing of the pasuk. And so what we're saying is he took the pasuk. He didn't say I'm going to darshan it in order. He did it in a different order completely, but the order was brilliant because he was able to build this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, each one built on the previous one. So in that sense, he did a really beautiful job. Even though I disagree with the whole drasha that he said. Now, he doesn't disagree with the drasha. What he disagrees with is the premise of it, that it's all built on each one is unnecessary in the pasuk because you could learn it all from Kal Vachomer, and because you could learn it all from Kal Vachomer, therefore it must be teaching you something else. And from that, he builds all these things. Now, we're going to put aside his question about that, but we're going to say, even if, let's say, you accept the Kal Vachomer, there's a different problem, which you might have thought of already. He's using all these Kal Vachomers to say it's obvious you get lashes for those because you could learn that from Kal Vachomer. Therefore, the lashes in the pasuk of the lotas I must be teaching you something else. V'chimas hirim minadin, but you can't create a lotase from a Kal Vachomer. We don't do that, right? Remember, you have to have your own azhara. You can't just say, "Oh, I could learn this from Kal Vachomer." And ha'afilu leman damar on shiminadin. Even those who say you could come up with the punishment from Kal Vachomer, which even that is a big debate. Most people say you can't on shiminadin. Everyone agrees. If you have a negative commandment, but without a punishment, maybe some people say you could learn the punishment from a Kal Vachomer. But if there's not even a punishment written, a negative commandment written in the Torah, you can't make up a negative commandment and a punishment, which is what he just did. So the Gemara answers, okay, don't worry about that. Isur Ba'alma, he was just telling you that you've transgressed a prohibition, but not that you're going to get lashes for it. He's just trying to say all these things can be derived from this pasuk, that you shouldn't do them, but not that you get lashes for them. But they said, how could you say that? Because Ha'amar Rava says, Zar she'achal min ha'olah lifnei zrika chutz l'choma. Okay, let's see how many things he did. He was outside the choma. It was before zrika. He ate from the olah. He was a non-kohen. And I'm missing one. What was it? And he was outside, right? He zar she'achal lifnei zrika chutz l'choma. Right. He was outside the walls, right? He wasn't bifnim. He was chutz l'klaim. That was the extra one. He was not only outside the walls of Jerusalem, he was also outside the Azara. Okay? Now that's all 5 we just mentioned in this Breita, right? That was the 5 things. Before Zrika, not right outside the walls of the Azara, outside the walls of Jerusalem. It was the Ola, which you're not allowed to eat at all, and it was a Zar who's not allowed to eat because he's a Zar. So you lokech chamesh. So here he says you're lokech chamesh, right? According to Rabbi Shimon. Now, that means you get lashes. That doesn't mean it's just a prohibition. So again, if his whole thing is premised on a Kal Vachomer, it can't possibly be because ein masirim min adin. So they say chamisha isurim habi. When he said lokech chamesh, he didn't mean lokech chamesh. He really meant there's just 5 prohibitions. Okay, but what's the problem? And this is what we'll end with. And here's the real big blow to Rabbi Shimon's approach. Ha'anantnan Eluhen Elokim. But these are listed in the Mishnah, which we just said the Mishnah goes like Rabbi Shimon, as you get lashes for them. You can't say, oh, when he said lashes, he didn't really mean lashes. In the Mishnah, for sure he meant lashes. This is the list, the perfect, this is the list of who gets lashes. So now we're stuck. Because if his whole thing is premised on a Kal Chomer, and that's how we got to all these halachot, it's all learned from Kal Chomer, and you can't get a negative, you can't create a negative azhara, which then you would get lashes for from a Kal Chomer, so we're stuck. Now you'll have to wait in suspense till the next year goes up, and you can see what the answer is and how we rework Rabbi Shimon's drasha. I'll just already tell you that the way we're going to rework it is really just the premise of it, not the details. The details are going to be the same. But he's going to say we can learn something from each of these words, but for a different reason. Not because you could learn each one from Kal Chomer, but for some other reason, and you'll see in the next class. So what did we do today? We started with this issue of the tevel. Is it tevel when you haven't done Maaser Ani? Maybe it's machloket Tanaim, maybe not. Okay, Rav says it's tevel. Is it that he accords with all the Tanaim, or maybe some Tanaim disagree? It wasn't clear. Machloket Abaye and Rav Yosef. Then we got to this issue of the chita, right? The Rabbi Rabbi Shimon's approach that you can be liable even for less than a shiur, right? And then the question was, is it only a grain, a whole grain? Does it have to be, or could it even be kemach? And we saw a debate between Rabbi Bibi and Rabbi Yirmiyah about what Rish Lakish really said about this, how Rish Lakish understood Rabbi Shimon. And then we got to this whole issue of the bikurim, that without kriyah and you eat it, you're going to get lashes. From there, we said, oh, that's Rabbi Akiva's shita. It's actually really Rabbi Shimon's shita, which was based on Rabbi Akiva. And here's Rabbi Shimon's braita. We learned through the whole braita, and then we undid the premise of the whole braita, and we'll get back to that tomorrow. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and B'sorot Tovot.